Awesome. Greetings to all the Insights beautiful ladies here and around the world. This global speaking opportunity tonight. It's pretty fun. It's great to be here. I would apologize for being 2 minutes late. I was actually here 30 minutes ago and realized I'd forgotten my iPad. But here's the reason I forgot my iPad. I told Laura. By the way, Laura Dubay is a new grandma. First time grandma. Pretty awesome. Very exciting. Her son and daughter-in-law are amazing people, absolutely the best. So that's pretty exciting for me. But about 45 minutes ago, I was sitting at home getting ready to come over here, and a couple of Amazon packages I threw in from the front porch, and Paula opened them. And one of them, Greg Gibbs, it surprised me, is our book that we wrote together. It came on Amazon. It surprised me. It's a not-for-resale book. It's a book that he and I have been working on for about 2.5 years on my childhood, where I wanted to tell the story of growing up in Memphis and it's all about the great people in my life. And I was so dithered about it. I just got in the car and came over here, and I realized I'd forgotten my iPad. I've never done that all the years, never forgotten my iPad or my notes. So anyway, that's it. So you guys ready to do Joshua 2? Shameless comment here about Lindy's opening talk about the overview of Joshua and Judges. I found that to be incredibly helpful for me personally, because one of the sticking points, as you know, in the modern world is understanding the violence and the nature of orchestrated violence in the Old Testament and what it is that God really intended. And the Bible Project video that you watched from Joshua was super helpful. There was a battle going on, but there was also all of these biblical teachings in the Old Testament about how to live with the foreigner among you and how to care for the immigrants and the foreigners. Leviticus 18, Deuteronomy 20, all that. And anyway, very proud of Lindy for doing that. And just coincidentally, she's my daughter, which is supposed to be funny, and none of you are laughing, so whatever. Okay. That's my first joke to bomb tonight. It won't be my last. Okay. So, are you ready for this? In Joshua 2 through 4 is an amazing vision of, I think, God's heart for the world in the midst of tremendous conflict. And I want you to see some of those things with me. And again, if you didn't hear Lindy's talk, if you haven't been here the last 2 weeks, I encourage you after this to go back and think about some of the context, because I'm going to dive in kind of into more specific incidents and people, okay, tonight, since that's been covered. The first one I want to cover is Rahab, right? That's the star of this story. What an amazing human. And since then, I've had such a regard for her. And it's interesting, when I was a kid studying the Bible, because so much of the Bible scholarship through the centuries was male-dominated, men never thought about the condition of the women in the context of these stories. It's very similar when we started working with the Pokot in Kenya. I was so fired up about wells, fired up about churches, fired up about education, schools and elementary and secondary schools for the children, concerned about medical clinics. And 10 years in, I had never once thought about the women. Well, the women carry all the burden among the Pokot. They have the most unbelievably challenging life. And as a man, I'm living that whole journey, dreaming all these big dreams, never once thinking about them. So typical. And so in recent years, as I began to see from the perspective, you've got to realize that Rahab and any other woman in this ancient part of the world, especially outside of the Jewish context, a woman would have had no rights at all. She would have been property. In the ancient cultic world with the Baals and the Asherahs, the children sacrifice, all this stuff. And so she's fighting for her life. And in this case, she's probably a comfort worker for the soldiers at the garrison of Jericho, which, from what we've learned in recent centuries, was probably one of the leading military bastions. So it wasn't just a city that was surrounded by walls. It was a military powerhouse fortress. And she was stuck within that with her family. So in light of that, when she takes these two spies in to hide them, she does something absolutely remarkable. And she hides them on the roof under it says the stalks of flax. Now, if anybody has any idea what that looks like, you get golden star points for the whole semester. Because I have no idea. I didn't look that up. I didn't even know what flax looks like. But they hid on the roof. And she talks to the king, to the ruler, to the leaders of this garrison, and she sets them on a wild goose chase. But she hides the spies. First thing that I want you to see, and by the way, Dee Dee's homework is so great on this. But this word hide, it means to store up treasure. It means to hide something from discovery. And here's what's interesting. In Exodus 2:2, it's the exact same word, hidden, that is used of Moses' mother when she hides Moses. Remember, in Egypt, all the male children were being sacrificed, being put to death because Israel was getting too influential and too powerful in Egypt. And it says in Exodus 2:2, the woman conceived and bare a son. This is Moses' mother. And when she saw that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. I think that's King James. She just saw it and she did it. This word to hide is all over the Old Testament. You could make a study probably of 10 different words throughout the New Old Testament that are in this story. But Psalm 32:7 is the one that I love the most, where the writer says, "You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance." Is that not cool? That this is what God is doing for the spies, because they're going to bring back a powerful report. So here's where she makes this request. She says in verse 9, if you did your work, she goes, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you." This word melt means to dissolve or to lose heart. And by the way, most of the time that it's used in the Old Testament, it's not used about God's enemies. Usually it's the people of Israel and the people of God losing heart. Let me ask you a question. Have you lost heart lately? Have you lost heart at different moments of your life? Heck yeah. I cannot tell you how many moments in my journey you'd ask me at different times of raising my kids, leading Kensington, working with other staff people, struggling in conflict and relationships, and you just like, wow. You just feel like it's too much. That's why I loved last Sunday, 2 weeks ago, I spoke on the 20th, I spoke at the Orion campus, but on the leper. Can you imagine the man with leprosy of losing heart? He would have lost his family, he would have lost everything. And it hit me when I was teaching that, just a week ago, that when Jesus healed him of the leprosy, he told him to go show himself to the priest. I used to think he was going to do that because he had to do a religious ritual that was required by the Old Testament. No, that was part of it. No, he had to go to the priest so he could restart his life. But here's what's interesting about that leper. He was starting at zero. Yeah, the leprosy was gone, but he'd probably lost all of his possessions, lost all of his relationships. He probably had no financial resources. He was beginning from zero. So Jesus, even though Jesus healed him, he had incredible challenges along the way. That's true for so many people. You can get a good thing happen, but then you got to climb your way out, starting at zero. That's happened to people throughout history. We're in Black History Month. That is exactly what happened in the black community in America, right? You got something good happen, but then all of these years of people getting ahead, having to start where? At zero, to try to build something, and the courage that it took to do that. Man, it's inspiring. Well, Rahab is one of those people, because she's going to start from zero. So she said, everybody's heard about you. And this word in the Hebrew, sama or shama, means to hear with attention and interest and understanding. She says, we're paying attention, at least in her listening. She said, we've heard. And I thought today, the first question I want you to think about as you're in your group, you think about your life, is how are you hearing from God today? Hearing from God is not a one-time thing. It's not like, man, I heard from God. God wanted me to start a church 34 years ago. No, that's ancient history. That doesn't even matter anymore. What matters is what? Am I what? listening to God today with attentiveness and with understanding, with interest. I'm paying attention. Where is God moving in my life? Where is God moving in your life? And one of the things, the reason you're here, the reason you're in small groups is to say to each other, hey, tell me how God's speaking to you. How's God moving in you? And so she talks about their hearts melting in fear. But then this is the big part. She says in verse 12, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you'll spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all belong to them, and that you will save us from death. You know what this tells me? In all likelihood, she and her family are indentured servants in the fortress of Jericho. They're not powerful people. They're people that are probably, just grinding out a living under the anvil of the leading power of Jericho. And yet here's a chance for them to have their lives saved. And she says kindness. This is one of the most famous Hebrew words. If you were to talk to a Jewish person today, and you said, tell me about kindness, they would instantly know the Hebrew word, which would be what? Remember from the homework? Hesed. Hesed. This is the overwhelming word that there's not even a definition. It's a word of well-being, of goodness and kindness. And Hesed, one writer, as I was studying this, said, Hesed is not a feeling, it's an action. It involves intervening and rescuing and being a blessing to others. It's a constant theme and is a description of God's character. In other words, God brings Hesed, well-being, into our lives. And it says, when we follow him, God's Hesed leads us into a life of meaningfulness and happiness. And then, this is interesting. This is brand new in this study. I've read this story many, many times. By the way, I forgot to mention this. When I was 16 years old and learning to study the Bible, my first inductive Bible study was 1 Thessalonians. Those four chapters, I think. Is it 4 or 5? I can't remember. Was it 5? So I did that, and then my next study was the book of Judges, which you guys are coming to real soon, which I love. It was very powerful in my life because it was a story of people trusting God and then forgetting God, and then trusting God and then forgetting God. Well, here we are at a moment where you're going to learn in the next 2 weeks, this Jericho is going to be a moment where the people of Israel trust God, and they're going to get to Ai next week, and they're going to what? They're going to forget and not trust God. It's just fascinating how we do this. But here's the interesting thing. She says, show loving kindness to me and my family. And the men say this phrase, our lives for your lives. I don't remember that anywhere else in the Bible. It's an oath. It's a statement of covenant. It says, if you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. And they say, our lives for your lives. What does this mean? The oath itself literally means our soul shall die for you. So it's a literal statement where you're saying, may I be damned if I do not fulfill this commitment to you. It's the strongest oath a person could utter. And this is my second discussion piece for you today and for you to think about your life is where in your life are you saying to people, to causes, my life for your life? Like, may I be damned if I do not fulfill the vow and the covenant I make to you. I think that's a vow I said to Paula many years ago. And we've had, you guys know, for those of you who know, you know our story. We had a lot of dark years. And it was about 100% my fault. Maybe only 99%. But I had sworn to her, my life for your life. You see, they pledged their life for the life of Rahab and her family in this sense. Said, may God punish us with death if we're faithless to you. And do not spare thy life, the life and the lives of your relations. You see, this is such a powerful oath. So back in 1985, I met Julius Murgor at Trinity Seminary, and I swore an oath to him. I said, I'll never forget you. I'll serve you. I'll support you. He thought I was going to go back to Africa with him. And in 1987, when I was finished with seminary, and I said, Julius, Paula and I are not going. And he said, okay. We lost contact for 15 years. My oath was so meaningful that we had literally not one piece of communication for 15 years. And when I finally heard about what he was doing, he had already avoided like 2 or 3 plots to kill him from tribal leaders that hated him bringing the gospel of Jesus to that community. But he had also helped start 100 church communities under trees. No thanks to me. And it was interesting, about 5 years ago, we were across the hall at an all-staff meeting where after 35 years, he finally shared publicly how utterly betrayed he felt by me back in those years, and how it broke his heart for years. In other words, I said my life for your life, but obviously I didn't mean it. And so in 2002, when we were reunited in Africa, in fact, Lindy taught, she went with me. She was a senior in high school back in 2002. We had an amazing trip. At the end of that trip, he came up to me, he's a big man, stood face to face, and he looks at me and he goes, so, are you going to forget me again? And I just wept. Because I just thought, so utterly faithless. And I thought, what is more important in life than making vows to say my life for your life? What is more important than that? To say to God, to say to people in your life, for me to say to my grandchildren, to do everything I can to stay healthy, to stay strong, to stay engaged, so that I can love my grandchildren and be a witness of Christ and a witness of love and compassion and hesed to them as long as I can, right? My life for your life. And I think my challenge for all of us, particularly as we age, there's this constant temptation that grew out of COVID more than I've ever seen it, which was the desire for people to live a comfortable life. It's incredible. Like, people got used to being at home. Man, let's just stay at home all the time. Let's just binge on Netflix. Let's just, I served in the kids department for 20 years. Yeah, I'm done. I'm done with that. I'm just it's like people took comfort in a negative way. And I thought, this is my question. What are the commitments to your life? Because Julius and I committed to each other back in the year after that in 2003. Julius came to America, and I said, Julius, and we've shown videos of it where we shared it together. We said, Julius and I committed to each other that until our last breath, we will not stop, we will not give up until every Pocot has clean water, until every village has a church, until Pocot pastors begin to move out as missionaries to other parts of the earth. You know what's happened in the last 22 years? Julius and now Ruben Mariakal, who leads that ministry, he's just 38. In Uganda, South Sudan, and Kenya, they're up probably approaching 600 churches that they've started in communities. They're working in 7 or 8 tribal groups. And we've got to be a part of that. 157 wells. We've been able to invest almost $20 million as a church. Because you know what's powerful to me? Is the people of Kensington said to me, our life with your life. Like, we'll commit. This is among many things. We've done this with Nepal, and I'm leaving in a couple of weeks to celebrate 20 years of church planting in Brazil with Ricardo Agresti. It's giving yourself to the things that really matter. And guess what happened today? This is so amazing. I was thinking about this. As I was coming in this morning to teach the Morning Insights group, I peeked into all staff across the hall, and they had a picture of Nate Marielke on with a huge crowd of Pocot people that was a live picture from today. And Nate has got his hand up and he's praying. And today was International Anti-FGM Day. It's the fight against female genital mutilation all over the world. And it's among no places at worth and among African tribal groups trying to get people to stop doing this. Nate was praying with a huge crowd of hundreds of people. 5 of the grandmothers, 5 of the women, who that was their whole livelihood and career, and they're making a public commitment and a public prayer today that they were putting away their knives forever. That was a huge moment. And that's because of you and of people who said, we're with you for life. We're going to be in this journey. And God has raised up some amazing Pokot women that are preaching a message of Christ and hope and transformation to the women, and the women are starting to really respond. It's absolutely amazing. So, where are you saying my life for your life? That's just a really big deal. Don't glide over that. Write that down. Talk to your family about it. See where you're making those commitments along the way. Now, she let them down by a rope through the window, and she said to them, go to the hills. And then this is the big part. The men said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless when we enter the land you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And unless you brought your father and mother, your brothers, all your family into your house, if any of them go outside, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. Now this is the part that I just love. This word scarlet. We're not even sure about the word cord, the word kut, which is probably a cord or a thread, a type of rope. And then this word scarlet, which is shani. This is they get red from a certain caterpillar. And somehow this caterpillar that does this, when it even comes out of its cocoon and it's birthing other caterpillars, that even the red will spill out and cover its offspring. Lindy taught about this because this was the caterpillar that ate the tree that Jonah was resting under. Lindy taught on this a couple of years ago. Does anybody remember that? This is in Jonah, where Jonah's so mad that the caterpillar comes up and eats all the leaves of the trees, and Jonah's bald head gets burned. I don't blame him for being angry. Totally legitimate, if you ask me. But this word scarlet is powerful. It's a picture of the sacrifice. And here's where it begins. In Genesis 38 to 28, this is a story of Tamar. A lot of you won't know the story, but Jacob had 12 sons. And Judah was the one who, of all the 12 sons, that the lineage of Jesus was to come through Judah, right? Because when you look at Israel today, another word for Israel is what? The land of Judah. Judah's 3 sons were a mess. You could go read Genesis 38. The first one doesn't want to be married. Another one doesn't want to impregnate his deceased brother's wife. So he spills his own semen because he doesn't want to impregnate her. God strikes him dead. It's a terrible story. And when I was candidating at Faith Church back in 1987, I taught Genesis 38 as my candidate to be associate pastor there. Dave Wilson, he was leading the young married Sunday school class. He came up to me and goes, "You obviously don't want a job here." I said, "Yeah, I know, but I love this story," because Tamar realizes that the youngest son is not going to be given to her. So she dresses as a prostitute and waits for Judah to take his livestock to market. And he negotiates, leaves his staff and his seal with her so he can have sex with her. Later, remember, he finds out that Tamar is pregnant. He says, "Bring her out, we're going to kill her." And then he finds out that he's the father. He goes, "She's more righteous than I." This is the story. So out of this horrific story, can you imagine how terrible the story would be if it was your family? It's a terrible story. Hurtful, painful. And so it says in verse 28 of Genesis 38, as she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand, one of the babies, 2 boys. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you've broken out." He says, "Whatever, it's crazy." She's probably like, so this is how it's crazy. You guys know how crazy birth is. I don't need to tell y'all. I almost became one of those fathers that, as the birth was just about to happen, that almost passed out, and killed myself. Fortunately, somebody had me sit in a chair, So funny. Such a turkey. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. So the fact that Zerah's wrist came out and he got the scarlet thread on his wrist meant what? He's the firstborn. Means of the two, he gets 2/3 of the inheritance. The line of his family is marked by his birth, not the other one. And so Tamar, who does all these machinations, gives birth to Zerah. What do we know about Zerah? Zerah is one of the fathers of Jesus. He's in the ancestry of Jesus. Tamar, who dresses up as a prostitute on the side of the road, she is one of the 5 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. It's like God judges her so hard, she goes, you're in the line. Isn't that incredible? Like, you think how judgy we get about people. And God chooses Tamar and this woman of faith. And so Rahab says, I'm going to hang out a scarlet cord. We're going to find out that she does, and her family is saved. The picture of scarlet is a picture of salvation. If you guys, I forgot to mention this morning, but it's cool because this is on video, hopefully. In Proverbs 31, it talks about the strong, powerful woman, the warrior woman. The word strength is the word used the masculine term of men in battle. It says a powerful woman, battle tested, a strong woman in Proverbs 31. One of the things it says about her is all of her children are clothed in what? Scarlet. Because it's a picture of covering, of salvation, of protection. And this is the picture that Rahab is going to accomplish for her whole family. And so what do we find out? Rahab is one of the 5 women mentioned in Matthew's genealogy in chapter 1. Tamar, the wife of Judah, becomes Judah's wife. Rahab, who becomes the wife of Salmon. Later, her son or grandson is going to marry Ruth, who is not a Jew. Rahab's not a Jew. Tamar is a broken woman. I don't even think she's Jewish. I got to go back and look at Genesis 38. Ruth is from Moab. She's not a Jew. She is adopted in to the lineage of Jesus. She's the great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus. So is Tamar. Bathsheba, who was sexually assaulted and raped by David, if you really look at the story. These are the women that bring Jesus and salvation to the world. I'm telling you, as a woman, you ought to think, man, when I go to heaven, I know who I want to talk to. These were courageous, courageous people. Even Bathsheba, in an impossible situation, you go back and read her story of how she negotiates for Solomon to become the king. It's incredibly difficult, of the intrigue. And then Mary, the mother of Jesus. What do all these women have in common? They all were women of questionable reputation. They were all women that were accused publicly of misbehavior. And these are the women that Jesus chose to be his mothers. Come on. Somebody give me something cool. Isn't that awesome? That is amazing. Look at what James writes about Rahab in the New Testament. James 2:24. This was in your homework. You see that a man is justified by works and not by faith. In the same way, Rahab the harlot, also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way. And so when you get to Matthew 1, verse 5, you read Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of King David. These are the grandmother and the great-grandmother of the greatest king of Israel, who David was a picture, a Christ figure, even though his own life was a mess. Okay. Now, we get to chapter 3, where they're getting ready to cross into Canaan. And Lindy mentioned this last week, where the Jordan was in the harvest time, was an impenetrable river. You could,
Like if any of you have been to Israel with Kensington, okay, is the Jordan kind of disappointing? The Jordan is about as wide as from me to Laura. You're like 20 feet wide. Like, this is pathetic. It's dirty. It's muddy. It's a gross river. You think, gosh, all this story about the Jordan River, I'm so disappointed. What's the problem? In modern times, the Sea of Galilee has dammed the Jordan River at the mouth of the Lake of Galilee, and they only let out minimal amounts of water. They're letting out so little water that the Dead Sea is drying up. Maybe in my lifetime, the Dead Sea may be just an alkali sulfurous pit in the lowest place. Basically, it's the lowest place on planet Earth. I think it's the lowest place on planet Earth. It's, other than in caves, because the water's not getting in the Dead Sea anymore. And so, but back then, in harvest, in the fall rains, the Jordan would be a mile wide. Actually, in modern times, I've seen, you go down to the Jordan and they actually have a sign where the Jordan River was 20 feet higher, even in recent modern times, even being dammed. Much less, it would spread out probably for a mile. And I love the stories about this. Now you're getting me, now I'm getting all crazy, old man crazy. But if you read 1 Chronicles 12 about the mighty men that came to David, the men of Gad, it says they crossed the Jordan. There was 11 of them. I call them the greatest football team ever assembled. The Gadite 11, I call them. They crossed the Jordan at flood stage and said everybody in the villages heard they were coming, fled to the mountains in the hills. They were so terrified by these 11 guys because it's like they crossed at flood stage. They're like, we don't care. So crossing the Jordan was a big deal. So when the Ark of the Covenant is set down into the Jordan and they walk across on dry ground, this is an incredible miracle. I'm trying to think. Imagine the Detroit River right downtown. And they walk out and they step, and all of a sudden water starts backing up towards Lake St. Clair and pushing down towards Boblo Island. And the next thing you know, people are walking across to Canada on dry land. It would be that incredible. The water from upstream stops flowing. It's cut off. It's an incredible miracle. And by the way, in your homework, how many of you did your homework? How close were the people allowed to be near the Ark of the Covenant as it was crossing? Wasn't that in the homework? He said, stay away. How far away? It was over a half a mile. I think it was 0.57 miles. You stay away. 1,000 yards. It'd be 3,000 feet. About 0.57 miles. So go over before the ark of the Lord your God. And then Joshua picked out one man from each tribe, said, grab a stone from the center of the Jordan River and put it on your shoulder, because it's going to serve as a sign among you. And in the future, when your children ask you what do these stones mean, I tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off, the karat, which, by the way, do you remember when Abraham is given a covenant from God, and there's the ox is cut in half, and it's kind of like the sun is setting, and Abraham walks through the two halves of the ox. The ox is cut in half. The Jordan River becomes the same covenant, gets cut in half, and the people walk through. It's a sign. This is an image of God's faithfulness to us. It's incredible. The waters are cut off. This cut off means to cut a covenant. It means that God is cutting a covenant with the people of Israel, and he's never going to back off of it. And it's going to become a memorial. I know that was in your homework. Psalm 32:6, which I already shared with you, 32 verse 7. David, quite a bit later, is remembering what God did. He says, let all the faithful pray to you while you may be found. Surely the rising of the mighty waters will not reach them. You think about the people leaving Egypt, the people walking across the Jordan, required incredible faith where you're walking between walls of water that would instantly crush you and kill you, but you believe in the faithfulness of God. And so then, in verse 17, Joshua says, come up out of the Jordan. And the priests came up out of the river, carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And no sooner had they set their feet on the dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage
as before. So you want to talk about flood stage, you're talking about the waters crashing and sweeping away. Have any of you ever been caught in flood stage? I was fishing on the White River in Arkansas for trout years ago. Nobody told us that they were opening the dam that day. We went from 2 feet of water to 30 feet of water in about an hour and a half. And we had earmarked a 3-day float trip down the White River. It took us 3 hours. And we almost drowned. It was absolutely incredible, the power that all of a sudden in this little trout river in Arkansas, that's what it was like to see the power of the river. And it says it came up, it ascended up. And by the way, when it said the water ascended back up to where it was before, it's the same word when Abraham offers Isaac up as a sacrifice. It's the same word. He offers him up on the altar. He offered him up. The water returned. It was lifted right back up. It's amazing these words keep returning. This word return, shu, means to turn back. You could spend a month studying every time it talks about God turning someone's heart or turning back to God or the rivers of God moving. But the word return or turn back is so powerful in the Old Testament. In fact, it's so powerful that it's used in the last verse of the Old Testament. It says the water returned back to its place. Malachi 4:6 says that God will turn the hearts of the parents to their children. He'll turn them back, and the hearts of the children will be turned back to their parents. The hearts of the parents will be turned back to their children. Or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. This is who our God is. He's always moving, always turning us, always redirecting us. Our God is a God of motion, and it's our joy to follow his movement. And if someone were to ask me what has been the greatest joy of serving at Kensington, it's certainly people coming to Jesus. But the thing that has been most meaningful to me is whenever we have called out for people to trust God and move out, people answered the call. Like the Pocot is just one example. There are people, every one of you in this room has responded to a call of God to do something. And it's been so incredible to be one of the leaders, to be a part of a movement where you call out, people answer and move out and reflect the heart of God. So thank you for that. Appreciate all of you for that. It's incredible. Now, last section. Verse 19, chapter 4. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up, camped at Gilgal, and it says Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones. And it says they're there to this very day, which they're probably not now, all these years later. But wouldn't you love to see those stones? I don't know if they're broken into dust or if they're scattered away. But he said to the Israelites in verse 21, when your descendants ask, what do these stones mean? Tell them Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. Now, I got to tell you something. I was telling Dee Dee this. Dee Dee, if you're watching this with your group, you missed this. But it's the word set up. When he set up the stones, it's the Hebrew word kum. In Hebrew, it would be transliterated Q-U-M, pronounced kum. It means to raise up or set up. And all of a sudden it hit me. I was like, I know this word was used in the New Testament. Does anybody know where? Jesus has a man come to him, and he says, my daughter is sick. And as they're on their way, they say, no need to come. Your daughter's dead. And Jesus says, let's keep going. He gets going in Mark chapter 5:41. He gets to the house. And what are the mourners and the people doing to Jesus as he's coming to the house? Does anybody know? They're jeering at him. And he takes her by the hand and he says to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, rise up. He sets her up back to life. And I thought about this. Not only were those 12 stones a memorial to the people of Israel of God's faithfulness, but this girl that Jesus raises from the dead, just like the people of Israel were brought out of Egypt, raised from the dead, this little girl becomes an eternal testimony of the faithfulness of God, just as the rocks at Gilgal. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan until you crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he did to the Red Sea. And it's what the Lord God did through Jesus. It's what the Lord God did to the little girl that was dead. Rise up. When Jesus comes to Lazarus' grave. What does he say to Lazarus? Lazarus, come forth. What does Lazarus' sister Martha says, Lord, I know that you will raise him up at the last day. And he goes, get out of the way, because we're going to raise him up today. This is what Jesus Christ does. So this is my last assignment for you, which is to say to you, you are a living testimony of the faithfulness of God. What God is doing in you is a testimony. The greatest temptation for you listening to this message would be to belittle the powerful work of God in your life. You have no idea, I have no idea what it is that God wants to do in our lives, but to move forth to respond to him. And then he says this in verse 24, at the end of this study, he says, God did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. So we're studying this, we're like, is God not for the people of the world? Like God's sending Israel, trying to find them a place, and they're in battle, people are being killed. Does God not care about the people of the world? And Joshua reminds us here, look at verse 24 of chapter 4. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Let me teach this, and then we're done. We're going to need a couple more minutes. He says that you might know. Do you know this word know is the word yada? It's the most intimate word for knowing in the Hebrew, in the Old Testament. It's the word that it says, and Adam knew Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to a son, Cain. And Adam knew Eve. She gave birth to Abel. In other words, it's this intimate thing of really knowing someone and of being completely intertwined and committed in covenant to another person. God says, I want you to know me like that. Now, I want you to remember this, because when you get to Judges, pretty soon you're going to get to Judges 2, where, and you're going to be taught on it. It says, after they come into the land, it says, another generation grew up that did not know who God was, who the Lord was, who Yahweh was, or what he had done for Israel. Like everything you're studying in Joshua, the next generation is going to forget all of this. That's why don't be surprised when your kids grow up and they decide not to know God's faithfulness. I want to say, don't worry. When I look back at my own family history, I can see generation after generation where someone followed Christ. I have a great-grandfather 8 times removed that was a Methodist minister like 250 years ago. And then his children would fall away from Christ, and the next generation would believe, and then the next generation would fall. In my family, and then the next generation would believe, and then the next generation would fall away, and this person would follow Christ, and this person would reject Christ. The question is, what are you and I going to do? Are we going to know what is said here, that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and that you might always fear the Lord your God? But then you say, what does God think? What is God's heart? It's verse 24, that all the peoples of the earth would know. This word all is the word kol in Hebrew, K-O-L. It means the whole. It means everyone in the world, whosoever would be the King James definition for this world. Whoever. And it says all the peoples. The word peoples here is am, which means nations, peoples, kinsmen, those related to each other, which would be tribal groups. And then of the land, it's the word aretz, which means every region, every territory. God's heart is that everyone would know him deeply and intimately and eternally. So even as the battle rages for Joshua and the Israelites, God's heart is for all peoples of every region of all the earth and of all the land. And this is what God's heart is for us. And that's why in the New Testament, Jesus says, whosoever will, this is in Mark chapter 8, verse 34, whosoever will may come after me. If you're just willing. If you said, who can come? Let's answer it together. Whosoever. Who can come? All. All the people of every region, of every land. That's why heaven is going to be so much better than here, because we're going to be gathered in this unbelievable fellowship of people. Revelation 22 says that the Spirit and the bride say, come, and let him who hears this come. Let him that is thirsty come, and whosoever will take the water of life freely. Isn't that awesome? This is for all of us. And so, I don't know what God is calling you and me to do in the time that we have left, but I can tell you this. My heart is for the whosoever. Like wherever it is. I'm taking off in a couple weeks to Brazil to celebrate 20 years of church planting with some unbelievable people. And Brazil, you guys, when you go to Brazil, it is like Sao Paulo, Campinas is like the whole world collided in these cities. It's like a collision of South American, North American, European, African, Asian, Middle Eastern collision. That's what Brazil is. It's really incredible. And I thought it's a picture of what God's heart is for the whole world. And that's just one of the places that we've gotten to be a part of to see churches launched. And so for you, these are the questions I want you to ask. But whatever God is telling you to do, let it be connected that all the people of the earth would know that God is powerful, loving, compassionate, and brings hesed to whoever will they may come. Okay? Is that enough? I talk too much. You forgive me? You forgive me? All right. Let me pray. Lord, thank you for these lovely, incredible servants who are ready to follow you and to do your will. What a joy to serve with them, and that we can say to you, Lord, whatever you tell us to do, we want to say yes. We want to be like Rahab. We want to be like the spies who trust and believe that you would give them the land. We want to be a part of your call to the whole world. We trust you. Move in us. We want to set up stones and memorial stones in our families and in our communities, in our small groups that remind us that you are to be trusted in every situation. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thanks, everybody.